had an insight recently, something that I learned about God as I have worked on and become a creator, I guess, a creative person that makes things. And I wanted to share it with you. The thought kind of starts out with this story that I saw, or article. I think it was an article that I read online. This was a few years ago when the first Inside Out movie came out. It was like after it had been released. And the article that I saw was a criticism of the character designs. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like they weren't diverse enough or body positive enough or something like that. I can't really remember. But I do remember that in the article, the character designer said that when they were designing the characters, Joy and Sadness, they wanted the Joy character to look like a star or a sun, something like that. And they wanted Sadness to look like a teardrop. And they based their designs on that. And I just remember thinking that that's really a brilliant solution or idea for that movie specifically, because, you know, those characters were meant to represent those emotions, and those are symbols that we generally think of as being, you know, representative of those emotions. I think that one of the reasons this sort of stuck with me was because the person criticizing the character designs, they weren't necessarily wrong exactly. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting characters that have more representation or whatnot. But they were wrong in the sense that they weren't taking in the whole big picture of the movie and making the best decisions for what the movie could be and what it needed to be. So anyway, taking that, you know, a little further on this idea that I had is, you know, when I create things, I usually have a purpose in mind. So just like in the Inside Out movie, they were representing specific emotions and they were trying to figure out the best visual way to do that. When I'm making something, I try to do that too. Like, there's usually a purpose or an idea, something that I'm trying to do with the art or the writing that I'm writing that expresses something, right? In this case, for example, I'm about to draw a flower, and really the purpose of this painting is to kind of give some visual interest while I'm talking to you on this video. So in that case, it's already fulfilling its purpose, and even if it turns out kind of bad, it doesn't really matter because it's already doing what it needs to do. But a lot of other times, most times, when I'm making something, there's something else that I want to say. And like sometimes that could just be, I see an interesting landscape or formation of mountains or something that might evoke an emotion that I want to portray in a painting. Or often, in my case, it can be to tell a story. I love telling stories with my art. So a few years ago, I made a Rumpelstiltskin illustration, and while I was making it, I had really specific goals in mind for how that would look and how it would work. And one of those was pretty early on in the process. I decided that I wanted it to feel traditional rather than something else. So I think with a lot of fairy tale stories where we've heard them often, it's a thing to make them, you know, modern or give them some kind of a twist. And in this case, I decided like that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to feel very much like you would picture the traditional fairy tale, some kind of historical context, something like that. I made the decisions accordingly. So when I was choosing what the character looked like and what he was wearing and the expression on his face and the lighting, all of those things informed what was happening in the story. And like it was making hopefully decisions that would make it so that when you, the viewer, saw the illustration, you knew right away that it was Rumpelstiltskin. And in this case, that he was kind of sinister, not a nice not a nice guy. So it could happen. Someone could come along later and see the illustration and say, you know, that illustration is fine, but it would be a lot better if, you know, you made it interesting. It's boring. It looks traditional. But that criticism doesn't take into account what I was trying to do, if that makes sense. So I think that we can do the same thing when it comes to God all the time. So, you know, if you haven't figured it out, I believe in God. And I see him as a creator. I think most people that believe in God do. He created us. He created the world. He created the universe. And I think that he didn't just do that willy-nilly, because that isn't how you create something good, especially good. So God is a creator, and he is a good creator, probably the best one, better than any of us. And he had a purpose. He had a plan for his creation that he put into place as he created it. So when we look at his creations, it's not always obvious to us that that's what happened. And we end up being like the people that were criticizing the inside out illustrations, because their view of things wasn't the same as the creator's view. So thinking just about what we know of God, like in the Bible, when it talks about the creation, it mentions, you know, separating the light from the dark and creating the land and creating the animals, creating the humans. I feel like that narrative of God creating the world kind of skips the planning stages that he must have gone through before he started on the actual like physical work. So we don't see it, but we do know that he has a purpose, that he wants for us to come back and live with him in heaven, and that he created the world so that that could happen for us. So I guess in the end, just my point is that sometimes we look around at the world and we see things that don't make sense. They're stupid. There are people suffering. There are animals suffering. There are, I don't know, insects that will kill us. And it's weird because it's like, well, you know, I'm thinking about my life, and my life would be so much easier if I didn't have to worry about black widow spiders. It would be a treat if I didn't have to think about that ever. Obviously, if that was the case, we wouldn't know. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. So it's easy to look around at God and be critical of what he made. And a lot of times when we do that, it's because we aren't seeing the big picture of what he wanted, why he sent us here, why he created us. And I also believe that if we try and ask God about things, he'll enlighten us. I think he wants us to discover the world and discover our purpose in it, and is more than willing to help us understand that anytime we ask. When you're being critical of God and his creations, it might be worth it to just take a minute or longer if needed to contemplate like what God made those things for and why it is the way that it is. And I think that when we do, and if we ask God, he'll tell us the reasons. Okay, so that's basically what I was going to say. I'm obviously still working on this painting. Finish it up so you can see it, and if you stick around to the end, I'll show you the finished product. All right, we're gonna call this done. It's basically just a little watercolor sketch. I think it turned out medium, which is totally fine because, as I said, the purpose was visual interest while we were talking. If you want to keep up with my art and what's going on, you can sign up in the box below this video and you'll get a free ebook when you sign up. Thanks. Bye.